Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Now that we've got sort of a basic understanding of how the quarter tone system works, we're going to do some listening. I'm going to be presenting what I think are some of the most interesting quarter tone pieces and break down what I think they do so well. I'm going to do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, the first time you hear music in the quarter tone system, it's going to sound really off. You need to really get used to it, open your ears up, and just hear a lot of it, really get engrossed and immersed in the sound before it starts to sound normal. But once you do, you're going to hear something really great. The other reason is to show you some of the things I talk about in the theory-oriented videos put into practice by various composers. Today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Charles Ives' 3 quarter tone pieces, number 3, Chorale. For those who don't know, Charles Ives was an American avant-garde composer of the early 20th century. He did a lot of experimenting with atonality and polytonality, and as it turns out, microtonality as well. This piece is the third of 3 experiments with the quarter tone system. I love this piece so much, it's really cool. The entire thing is 4.5 minutes long, but today we're just going to be looking at the first 45 seconds because there's so much interesting stuff to discuss, so much going on, that I think if I were to go any further, it would get overwhelming pretty quickly. So now let's take a listen to Charles Ives' 3 quarter tone pieces number 3, Chorale. So, there's a lot to digest there. But let me begin by pointing out something really cool that's going on here. Charles Ives loved quoting a variety of folk songs. In particular, when he was 17, in 1891, he wrote a number of variations on America, which you probably know as My Country 'Tis of Thee. My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. Now, let's listen again from the top and see how many times you can hear that melody being played in this piece. You'll notice that he doesn't ever use the entire melody. There's enough there that when you know it's there, you can really hear it, and it's a cool little nod. But if you don't know you're listening for it, the piece still stands on its own pretty well, I think. So now let's take a look at some of what's going on besides that, especially harmonically. Let's see how he's using these quarter tones. The first chord is a chord that we actually talked about pretty recently here. In particular, it's the C neutral 7 chord. It's got a C, an E half flat, a G, and a B half flat. It's a really cool chord. It's both very dissonant and yet also really stable. It's kind of cool that he starts the piece with this very off-putting, unfamiliar chord. He doesn't ease you into it. You're forced to deal with these new harmonies right away. And it sets a tone for the rest of the piece that's kind of depressed and deflated, and yet at the same time, somehow beautiful. Now you'll notice, if you look at the score, it doesn't look like that. Actually, you're probably wondering where all of the quarter tone notation is, and what's even going on here. So, what we have here in the score is 2 pianos. Originally, this piece was devised either to be played by 2 different people, each sitting at their own piano, or 1 person with 2 pianos next to them. Point is, one of the pianos would be tuned a quarter tone sharp, and that's the top score. The bottom staff is just an ordinary tuning. you'll notice that it's written so that you can play the normal notes with your left hand and then the tuned up notes with your right hand, but you could also play this with two different people. One of the weird consequences of writing it this way is that it can be kind of tricky to analyze. There's a lot of stuff with how chords are spelled and how the voice leading works that isn't immediately obvious. That's why I'm going to be breaking it down. So here, the C neutral seventh is actually spelled as a C, D3 halves sharp, G, A3 halves sharp, which is kind of weird. It's obviously not what's going on, but it does sound the same. Classic use of enharmonic notes. Let's play it again. I think that second to last chord is really cool. It's basically functioning like a dominant chord, and I think it's reasonable to say that. If you look, it's got a G in the bass and then a D above it, and then the other two notes are an F half sharp and an A half sharp. So this is kind of like a G neutral seventh chord with an added neutral 9. It still sounds dissonant and really alien, and yet it brings you back to that C neutral seventh chord really well. I just think it's kind of neat how, even in this quarter tone world, you can still kind of think about chords working in a similar way. You still have your tonic and your dominant. There's also some cool voice leading with these two chords that's not immediately obvious. If you look, you'll notice that we've got the F half sharp and the top staff resolving up to a G natural, and the D resolving up to a D3 half sharper, if you prefer an E half flat. These aren't semitones, they're basically a full semitone and a quarter tone, and yet they still kind of work in the way you would expect voice leading to. I also like how by the end of these 4 chords, that C neutral 7 chord that sounds really jarring the first time you hear it, now sounds like home. It sounds like a really comforting bass. Ives then kind of plays around with this material a little bit more. What was that? That might be my favorite chord ever. At the very least, it's up there. I don't know how to analyze it. It's got an F, B flat, and E flat in the bass, which feels kind of like some kind of chordal voicing, but then on top of that, you've got a C half sharp and a G half sharp, several octaves higher. So cool. And it doesn't sound as dissonant as those earlier chords do, to me at least. Throughout this section of the piece, Ives is doing a lot of separation. He's keeping the regular notes low and the quarter tone notes high, and that's especially clear here. I think it's a really neat device, and it gives some insight as to how to go about using these chord tones as extensions to chords to create more colorful sounds that you couldn't ordinarily hear that have that really sour taste. Now, what happens next is really complicated, so we're going to cut the video off here for today, but we will be coming back to it. So until that day, stay tuned.